At the beginning, we were really interested in habit formation. And most of the research on habit to date that's really strong has been done actually at the gym. And the reason for that is mostly practical. We care about habits like smoking and eating, nail biting, drug use, alcohol abuse. But a lot of those can't be objectively measured. You rely on self-report. People are inclined to lie for good reason because there's an obvious sort of best behavior in many of these cases. And so those aren't great for studying. But going to the gym, at a gym where someone has to swipe in through an entry system, is actually an objective metric that we can track, that people want to do repeatedly. They're trying to form habits around. Over and over again, researchers have found that this is an excellent way to study habits in humans. And the findings from the gym seem to be applicable to these other domains. So we thought, let's use that gold standard and start there.
This is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Audience, today, I am speaking with Dr. Catherine, aka Katy Milkman. Katy is an author, a podcaster, an educator, a behavioral economist, and of course, a visible voice. Katy is the James G. Dinan Endowed Professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and co-director of the Behavior Change for Good initiative. Interestingly, she has secondary faculty appointments in the Department of Sociology at the University of Pennsylvania and in the Perelman School of Medicine. Katy's research focuses on understanding how to create lasting behavior change. She's conducted some of the largest field experiments in the space. Her work has informed policy and practice at organizations ranging from Google to the White House. She's the author of How to Change, the Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And she hosts the behavioral economics podcast, Choiceology for Charles Schwab. Katy, welcome to the Visible Voices podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I am excited that we are here together. So you just celebrated the 4th anniversary of your book, How to Change. How are you different having written this book?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. For me, it was a really exciting experience of bringing together all of the science I had learned over the course of my career about this one topic that had become not just a fixation, but sort of an obsession. But a scientist normally is spending their time going really deep into a narrow, specific research question and making sure that they understand every little bit of that. And writing this kind of a book forces you to zoom way out instead of having your scientist hat on and thinking, how can I poke at this? What might be slightly different for certain subpopulations about this phenomenon than others? Instead, it zooms you out and has you ask the question, how does everything I know fit together and how can it help people? And so writing the book and taking that lens on the work, I think really helped me appreciate how useful the tools I had learned as a scientist were, how broadly applicable they were, and has helped me have so many valuable conversations with doctors, with lawyers, with folks working on Wall Street, with folks working on Main Street, about how all these insights could be practically applied to make lives better. And so that's made my life richer to be able to understand that kind of impact and hopefully help people.
When I was doing my deep dive and prep for our conversation, there were 2 personal stories that tied in some of your behavior economics, behavioral science. And I'm wondering if you can share those stories with the audience. One is about the ring that your husband bought you, and the other is about buying a home and negotiating the purchase of that home.
Sure. Actually, that's funny. These came up both probably in a very recent episode of my podcast, Choiceology, where we were talking about left digit bias, which is the tendency that we have to focus more on the left digit of numbers. So if you offer me a price of $9.99, say, on a product I'm interested in, I'm going to find that much more appealing than $10, even though they're identical prices, essentially, right? Round off error. But $9.99, I'm going to focus on the left digit and think, oh, that's under 10. Whereas 10 is a threshold. And this comes up in lots of situations. So the fun way that it came up for me in my life is that my husband, who is also an academic, loves to outsmart systems, as do I. We both have PhDs, and this is one of the great things that brings PhDs joy, is to outsmart systems. So when he proposed to me, he gave me a ring, just like most Americans do. So we were a little bit traditional in that sense. But what was not traditional is that he told me he'd built an algorithm to find price discontinuities in diamonds. And it became very clear that if he bought me one that was just under a round number threshold in terms of its carat size, he could get an amazing deal. So he was very proud to tell me this is one of the highest quality diamonds possible. You get more clarity and so on, but it's just below this round number threshold. So I got an amazing deal on it. And he, showed me the graph he'd made. And of course, this to me was just about the most amazing attribute that a future spouse could have, that he'd spent all this time in this particular way.
Language.
Yes,
Total
exactly.
love language.
So years ago, when bidding on a house, we got a final bid, and I knew not to bid right at a round number threshold, right? We weren't going to bid at a, say, $100,000 mark, but I went to a pretty round number in the end. It was a 25. It ended in 25. And we were outbid by someone who went to 30. And in hindsight, it should have been clearer to not go to such a round number, like to go a little further above a threshold. And I felt really silly when that happened, especially as someone who teaches about how do you think more steps ahead than the person who you are competing with. I teach these things in my classes, but even those of us who teach it, sometimes when we're in it, don't focus on the science and how it can be best applied. And I will say I make all sorts of mistakes all the time. But what I hope I do is that when I make them, at least I like to learn and grow and think about, what's the scientific angle, and is there a research study that I could do to help other people, or what are the key lessons so we can do better in the future?
Yeah, I love those two stories. You are right. It's from a recent episode, but I thought both were illustrative. I wanted to use that word, illustrative, of behavior economics and how they play a role in our everyday life. When do you think you realized you had a voice, and when did you start using it? And that could be in the classroom, that could be the podcast, that could be in writing.
That's a great question. I think the first really exciting moment for me that felt like it taught me people were interested in what I had to say and what I was thinking was actually a very early moment in my career. So when I was an undergraduate at Princeton University, I had to write a senior thesis. And I wrote a senior thesis that was very unusual because I was an engineer. I was studying operations research and financial engineering. Amazing department at Princeton, by the way. Everyone should check it out. I was so fortunate to be there. I was basically learning a lot of computer science and statistics and mathematical modeling. But I also was doing a minor, Princeton calls it a concentration, in American studies. And Princeton required that you write a senior thesis. And not only that, it had to combine components of your major and your minor. And so that's a hard thing to do. Lots of people are minoring in finance or something like this, something related, computer science. Not so many people were studying engineering and minoring in American studies. And I was like, how am I going to thread this needle? So I spent a ton of time thinking about what I'd do for this thesis, maybe more time than I spent thinking about any other project before starting it. And what I ended up choosing was I did a statistical analysis of a decade of New Yorker fiction. So I read hundreds of short stories. I classified them. Today, you'd have AI do this, right? But in this year, I literally had to go to the bowels of a giant library and check out bound volumes of the New Yorker to get the content. It wasn't even digitized. It's crazy how old school this was. My content classified them. Was it a first person narrative or third person? Where was it set? Who was the protagonist? What were their demographics? What were the themes of the story? Was it about abandonment and loss? Was it about love? These are the kinds of things that I'm classifying. And then I did this massive statistical analysis to answer a bunch of different questions about that decade of fiction. I looked at whether or not editorial shifts at the helm of the New Yorker versus the helm of the fiction department shifted the types of fiction that were being published. I looked at whether or not authors wrote about characters who resembled them demographically, to what extent essentially was fiction autobiographical. So I did this whole big analysis, and I thought this was the coolest thing that had ever happened. But I figured, I'm just scratching my own intellectual itches. No one will care. And this amazing thing happened, which is that people really cared. So literally the day I graduated from Princeton, my face, this is the most media attention I've ever gotten. My face was on the cover of the art section of the New York Times on graduation day with a huge spread on an article about my analysis of New Yorker fiction, what it had found, comments from editors at the magazine. It was an amazing write-up. All these people are calling me and emailing me and asking questions. Somebody was, will you write a book about this, blah, blah, blah. It was overwhelming, but also it was this moment when I thought, holy smokes, the things that I am deeply intrinsically interested in, that I am exploring scientifically, other people want to know. Other people care what I have to say and what curious things I'm discovering about the world. And I felt like that was the moment when I realized if I'm going to progress in this field and become a social scientist, which I already plan to do, I already was planning to head off for my PhD in the fall, an important and exciting part of this journey is going to be communicating the work because people care. I mean, even about New Yorker fiction, right? And I wasn't even studying something with practical import at that point. But that was sort of what helped me realize there's a whole world out there that's truly intrinsically interested in the science, and making sure that it's not just for me, that it's for everyone, that they get to learn. That's a big and fun part of the job.
It was authentically your voice. And I think it's one of those lessons, the more authentic you are and doing the work that intrinsically interests you, it's going to come through in your work and in your writing. And lo and behold, it's interesting to the world. You brought up AI, and I am interested in how you think AI is going to affect or enhance behavior change interventions, research, et cetera.
So many of our studies now are looking at ways to harness AI to help coach people towards better outcomes, to see whether or not these interactive, engaging conversations lead to more change than the sort of static messaging we've been stuck with for so long. Also, personalization is so much more feasible, which has always been something we knew had to matter, but was very hard to do well. And so now we're going to have much more opportunity to personalize. It also is just going to accelerate science because it makes answers arrive at our fingertips. Whereas we used to spend months reading up on an esoteric statistical tool and trying to figure out whether or not we could use it in the way we needed to solve a problem and consult lots of experts. Now you can have a conversation with AI in 15 minutes and figure out what probably makes sense. I mean, you still have to do some follow-up work, but it's massively accelerating the speed at which we can do the work, which opens up possibilities to ask more interesting questions at a time or over the course of a year. So it's going to have a huge impact. And it already is. There's no scientist I know who isn't using it in game-changing ways, both to accelerate the process of doing research and to adjust the actual questions they're asking and the science they're doing.
It's graduation season, and guess what? There's a perfect gift for anyone taking the next big step. It's called Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact, co-authored by Dr. Resa E. Lewis. This book breaks down success into specific intentional behaviors that anyone can develop, whether you're a student entering the workforce or simply wanting to improve your daily interactions, and who wouldn't want to do that? These evidence-based techniques will transform how you communicate and present yourself. What makes this book so special is that it doesn't offer generic advice. It provides actionable resources that make a real difference in all aspects of your life. Available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook formats wherever you get your books. And if you're looking to bring microskills to your organization or student group, reach out to Dr. Lewis directly via LinkedIn or through her website. Remember, Microskills, your go-to graduation gift that keeps on giving throughout life's journey.
2017, you and Angela Duckworth co-founded the Behavior Change for Good initiative. And this caught my eye, number one, because I'm interested in the work you're doing and also in human behavior and change, but also because I've been pursuing more work in lifestyle medicine, which is looking at behavior change to prevent, treat, reverse the chronic diseases that are plaguing many, many Americans: diabetes, cancer, hypertension, obesity. And so I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the initiative. And I really like what you and Angela have done and described, where you're talking about that behavior change is interdisciplinary and that you're really just scaling your studies largely. They're huge studies, and therefore there's a lot that can be concluded from them.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving me the chance to talk about one of my favorite things. This organization that we founded was designed to accelerate the science of behavior change in 3 particular areas. So we study behavior change in ways that might help with human health outcomes, right? So we care very much about how do we get people to exercise more regularly, take preventative screening seriously, get their vaccines when those are recommended. How do we convince people to eat healthier? These are the kinds of questions that we're interested in. And then we're also interested, though, in 2 other areas. We study how do we improve people's financial well-being, so savings outcomes primarily. How do we help people save for retirement? How do we help them set aside emergency savings? As well as in education, how do we help people attain more in that domain? So how do we help high school students progress further in math? How do we help college students get better grades and stay in school, and so on? Those are kind of the three pillars. And the idea was, there were several ideas actually. One is that there's a lot of silos in academia, a lot of people studying one of these problems, but not aware of what's going on in the other area. And they're fundamentally very similar policy challenges. They all really involve forming healthy habits, as well as getting people the insights they need in order to make the right choices, as well as helping people think about delayed rewards and focus on those delayed rewards. So in addition to the idea that there are these three pillars that have common solutions likely that people should not be in silos, they should be talking and sharing insights across education, financial well-being, and health research. We also felt like there's a lot of silos within academia. Economists working on a problem in one way, psychologists focusing on another way, computer scientists, sociologists, lawyers, doctors often will come to similar problems, but not share insights or work together. And we thought, what if we could really be a massive accelerant by breaking down all of these barriers? And that's really the mission of the Behavior Change for Good initiative. We have a group of about 180 affiliated scientists and counting, growing all around the world, who are interested in problems of behavior change, who are interested in doing research in the field, not basic research, but really applied research to try to help people's lives immediately. And we specialize in a form of science that we developed that we call mega studies. So mega studies, instead of an A/B test or a simple randomized controlled trial that compares one way of encouraging people to exercise more against another way and tests a single hypothesis, we'll actually go to our team of scientists and say, what are all of your best ideas for, let's stick with this example, encouraging exercise? How would you go about that? And then different teams submit different proposed study designs, and we actually launch them all at once with a single common outcome variable, say exercise. So we randomly assign maybe 60,000 people in an experiment to get different programs designed to help them exercise more. Maybe we have 60 versions of a program. And then in a head-to-head comparison, we can figure out, well, what was the most effective program? And what were its ingredients? And how did it compare to the second most effective? And what were those ingredients? And so scientists can still do what they're good at, which is testing a simple single hypothesis, but they're no longer doing that in an isolated challenge where they then go and write up their results and say, here's what I learned. They're doing it right next door to another team of scientists, and they have to engage with, well, what did those people find and how does it relate to what I'm thinking about? It's an accelerant because now many hypotheses are tested simultaneously, but we also start seeing how everything compares to one another in a common population with a common outcome, which is really relevant for policy. Thinking, okay, what is the most effective? Not just what are many effective ways, but what is the most effective or the set of the most effective, indistinguishable, most cost-effective tools we can use. And so, yeah, we've been running mega studies at the Behavior Change for Good initiative for almost a decade now. We just launched our 7th, I believe, this April of 2025. And it was a mega study designed to promote student success in college. It involved over 30 university partners around the United States, universities and colleges. About 100,000 students who are entering freshmen will go through the programs that we've built to try to help them succeed, essentially orientation programming. And then we will evaluate which leads to the best outcomes, which support student success most effectively. So we're constantly doing this work, and it's been just a really exciting journey. Great gatherings, a great organization, great staff that make it all possible. And it feels like we have actually revolutionized the way science is done, because now mega studies are being launched all around the world, not just by us, but by other teams and published in top journals. And it's a new way of doing science that we created.
Super fun, super accelerated. For the student success in college that you just mentioned, is the endpoint graduation, or how is success defined?
Fantastic question. We have many endpoints, actually. Graduation is pretty far off. And so often the statistical power, that's nerd speak for sort of the size of your telescope, like how easy will it be to measure this thing? It's harder to measure things that are more distant. So we have more proxy variables. But of course, what we ultimately care about, yes, is things like graduation. What we're looking at is how long people stay in school. Do they stay in school through the end of their freshman year? Do they re-enroll sophomore year? Those kinds of outcomes, which are a little closer to the moment of orientation than graduation, which takes sometimes up to 6 years to actually measure. But we know, of course, that if you drop out early, you're not going to make it all the way to graduation. We're also looking at the student GPA. So in addition to wanting to see if we can keep people in school, we also want them to perform better while they're in school. So we're looking at their first year, first semester GPA, whether they stay enrolled. Those are the most immediate measures we'll look at. And then we will also look at graduation. That's just a very downstream outcome.
Yeah. I shared with you that a professor friend asked me questions regarding you and your work because he is in the same field. And how do you decide what questions are worth your time investment and your resource investment for these mega studies?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And to be honest, it's a really good question because I'm not sure we've done it in the most systematic way. At the beginning, we were really interested in habit formation. And most of the research on habit to date that's really strong has been done actually at the gym. And the reason for that is mostly practical. We care about habits like smoking and eating, nail biting, drug use, alcohol abuse. But a lot of those can't be objectively measured. You rely on self-report. People are inclined to lie for good reason because there's an obvious sort of best behavior in many of these cases. And so those aren't great for studying. But going to the gym, at a gym where someone has to swipe in through an entry system, is actually an objective metric that we can track that people want to do repeatedly. They're trying to form habits around. Over and over again, researchers have found that this is an excellent way to study habits in humans. And the findings from the gym seem to be applicable to these other domains. So we thought, let's use that gold standard and start there. So we started in the gym, and then COVID hit. And there, actually, it became clear quickly that our highest and best use would be to try to contribute to that crisis in whatever way we could. So we really pivoted to try to be policy responsive. We weren't focused on hesitancy. We were really focused on helping people follow through who intended to get vaccines, but we know there's a lot of drop off even among those who say, this is something I want to do, but how do we actually get them to follow through? It's called the intention action gap. And we're quite good at studying it. And we thought this is an area that was sort of uncontroversial and we can make a dent in. And so we did a lot of work there. That's when we sort of started to think, oh, okay, now what are the next big questions we should take on? And there has been a lot of discussion, and for good reason, about the challenges with college completion in this country. There's a huge amount of people with a huge amount of debt who don't finish college. And while there is some research suggesting that behavioral science can be helpful, there's not a lot. And we thought this was a really excellent opportunity for us to step in. So it's been a case-by-case basis. And I feel like we've been reactive often rather than proactive, but we're working towards being more thoughtful and careful about choosing, what is the next big thing we can pick off that really we can make a dent in.
Out of curiosity, college completion, college success, what's been the curve over time?
That's a great question, meaning like, are the rates of dropout getting higher or are they getting lower? There's so many different variables there that I honestly haven't even focused on that. We've been focused on what they are currently. So much has changed from the demographic composition of who's going to college to cost of college. So I'm not sure exactly what I would even take away if there had been massive shifts in completion rates, because everything's shifting. But right now, completion rates are at many, many schools quite low, right? So we're partnering with schools where on average, only half of students complete a degree. That means they still have debt, but they have none of these amazing benefits that you get when you actually carry that degree.
I didn't know if maybe there was a pattern appreciated by you and your team members that are like, we should look at this because things are changing. People with certain brains are always thinking about these things like, oh, more people seem to be going to community colleges, or a lot of these kids are just saying, I don't need college, or I'm going to do an online degree, or I'm just going to be a startupper.
There has been a huge shift in the ambition to go to college, right? And there's been political shifts that go along with that, but that did not in any way motivate this work. We think about these intention action gaps where people have a goal and they don't achieve it. And how can we help? And college completion is a natural one. No one starts college if they don't have a goal of finishing college, right? So the fact that we see these gaps is a very strong signal that there's something a behavioral scientist might be able to do to help, because people are not achieving their goals in this domain. So that was more what drew us to this. It felt like an important problem and one that you'd need a lot of resources and savvy partnering with organizations to be able to tackle as a social scientist. And so we thought we're really good at that at this point. We're good at wrangling these partnerships and wrangling these scientists, and not that many people can pull that kind of thing off. And so we're trying to use that expertise in the ways that are best leveraged to make the world a better place.
Yeah, it sounds fun. And these pillars that you outlined, financial health, education health, health, these are all determinants of health that help people thrive in their lives in a healthy
and
way.
Happiness, right? So,
Right.
Yeah, educational attainment, you're absolutely right. Financial stability, these things lead to better health outcomes and longer, happier lives.
Yeah. You have a wealth of studies and science that you have done. And there's so many just catchy topics that I love thinking about, such as choice, friction, nudge, sludge.
Yeah, no, well, I'll probably make you repeat all the words again before I do, or as I define them. Let's start with choice, because I can hold one thing in my memory at a time for sure. A choice is any situation where you're facing a decision, right? I'm making a choice about how to answer this question. I'll make a choice later about what to have for dinner. Anytime there's multiple options in front of you, you're facing a choice, right? Yeah, we're familiar with friction probably in the physical world, right? Like, oh no, there's friction on my tires and they're not going forward. This is a really crummy driveway. The kind of friction we are talking about as scientists is also anything that is slowing us down, anything that's getting in our way. So a website that's confusing. I'm trying to make a choice about how to allocate my retirement savings, but gosh, this website is so confusing. There's so many choices. I'm overwhelmed. That's a source of friction. Or I don't know who to call to get this resolved. That's a source of friction. I have to walk 10 blocks in order to drop off this form. That's a source of friction. Anything that makes it more difficult to act on our intentions is the kind of friction we mean as behavioral scientists that can get in the way of good outcomes for people and people making the choice that they really want to make and that will make their life better. Nudge versus sludge. Okay, so a nudge is any push that you get from a parent, a policymaker, a teacher, anyone in your life. A nudge is a push in a direction that doesn't employ the traditional policy tools of incentives, information, bans, but is using an understanding of psychology to change your decision. So I send you a reminder to go to the dentist. That is a nudge. A nudge is a reminder. I redesign a website to be much simpler. That's a nudge so that it's easier for you to make a choice. I create a wise default, meaning I invite you to say, sign up for a 401k, but if you don't sign up for a specific 401k, you will just automatically be enrolled in one at a default savings rate and in a default target fund so that you're going to have some savings generated out of every paycheck at this employment relationship you've just started. Those are all nudges because I have an understanding of how you operate and I'm adjusting things either as your employer or your parent to just make the choice that I think is best for you a little easier, a little more likely to arise. So that's nudge. Sludge is the same as a nudge, but it's when nudging is used for evil, right? So it's like putting up obstacles as opposed to simplifying or pushing you in a direction that isn't welfare enhancing. That would be sludge. And sometimes sludge is just friction, right? I make it harder to find the rebate. You have to get 17 different envelopes and mail them to 17 different addresses by this date. And then you get the rebate I promised you. That's sludge. Sludge in the way of you getting what you wanted, but probably putting profit in my pocket. Sometimes sludge is there deliberately. And sometimes sludge is there just due to incompetence. Often bureaucracy has lots of sludge, not because someone's trying to make it hard for you to get XYZ, but because they weren't thoughtful in designing systems in a way that would make it as easy as possible, given the human operating system. The hope is, and the hope in my field is that we as scientists are supporting a world where choice architects can be empowered to maximize welfare because they have a lot of scientific principles that allow them to nudge in good directions that are welfare enhancing.
And for audience members that want to learn more about you and follow along, what's the best way to keep in touch?
For people who want to follow along, I have a podcast called Choiceology. I have a Substack called Milkman Delivers. Very proud of that name. Thank you to my amazing MBA students who forced me to go with that name rather than something boring that I was thinking of, like Katy's newsletter. And then, of course, I have a book, How to Change. That's not exactly following along, but that is one way to learn more about the work I've done and how it might be helpful to you in your life.
The Resa Wrap-Up. Special thanks to Dr. Katy Milkman for joining me in conversation. Katy is an author, a podcaster, an educator, a behavioral economist, and of course, a visible voice. Check out the initiative she co-founded with Dr. Angela Duckworth. This is the Behavior Change for Good initiative. The pillars they are tackling are health, finance, and education. These three are determinants of health. And what really is interesting to me is their design. Mega studies allow for simultaneous testing of multiple hypotheses in behavior change research. Moreover, AI, along with these mega studies, is completely revolutionizing the field. That's all I have for you this week, audience. See you next time. The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and current trends spaces. We are a production of the People's Media Network. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Please find me through my website and on social media, Resa E. Lewis, MD, or through the podcast, thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please be sure to share the show with a friend. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the institution with which they are affiliated or identified. Information herein should never be used as a substitute for clinical judgment or for medical advice.